Okay, hi. I am back gonna play another game here. Gonna play Dark Side for the first time in some months. I found some hunt down deck a little while back. I don't remember where from. I think I copied it card for card. And let's see how it goes against WAP. I just now looked at oh, it was 12 card apparently. I just now looked at set 25 and 24 and looked like nothing immediately obvious that goes into hunt down. So we'll see. Um, anyway, again, just maybe another. Just my interest at the moment is going to be talking about politics. So again, if you're completely burnt out or have no interest in hearing about politics, don't watch, because that's what I'm going to be talking about. Specifically, I was thinking that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to kind of like go back and take a not so much specific view as much as kind of a fundamental view and talk about my theory of history. Okay, okay, there's something that makes Vader deploy +1 or something, right? Isn't there? Just deploy Vader? Okay, so he does have, so he's probably going to have a system in this deck. Okay, so yeah, um, the thing is, I'm wondering if I should force push this. I definitely don't want to grab. I think so. There's not really a way to check this deck, but also I'm not familiar enough with the deck that. So if I force push, I get rid of maybe. Get rid of this site and put a 0 back in. Maybe Mulsith Infiltrator. Or I could get rid of Sith. Yeah, we'll put a 0 back in. Yeah, you know what? Let's do it. Hoping to find Vader's castle here. Or Vane. Oh, so Vane has been neutered a little bit. Vane is no longer essentially free. So I can't play Vader and Vane this turn. What is this? Cancel or reduce force gains. Okay, it doesn't protect my battle destinies at that site though. Is this good? This might be good. If I can't do Vane this turn, that makes... Sorry, I know I wanted to focus on politics here, but we're figuring out this game. Alright, anyway. You know, it's a combination stream. No one's gonna watch me just for politics. Because there are much more knowledgeable people. But, at least on the topic of today, I think I'm probably the best authority among Star Wars CCG players on what I'm about to be talking about. So it's either I am your father or Vane. I think it's Vane and then wait until next turn to play Vader. Yeah, let's do that. Put away the infiltrator and down. Your manage thing here, so this makes so you can no longer pull the Mustafar docking bay. Put Vane there for 1. Pull the site. I mean, it makes sense. Vane is a ludicrously good card, so I understand why Vane was nerfed. But I also don't exactly like the whole thing about how we just play this out. Alright, and then I'm just drawing and I'm hoping to find I am your father, I think. Is this card completely dead? Yeah, they can't have any rebels, so. Okay, anyway, let's talk politics. Back to my theory of history, which I think that's where the starting point should be in terms of discussing political ethics and political understandings, if you want to go down to like a foundational level. I I mean, I'm sure. Oh, is that? No, that's fine. It's definitely, you can have your foundation, you can explore like ethical foundations for politics. But I ultimately think that's kind of an exercise in sophistic masturbation, which is not to say that I'll never engage in that, but I don't think people actually arrive at their political conclusions informed by a ground up sense of ethics. I think it's mostly from those things are just felt at some level that we don't have the capability of understanding. And we can sometimes try to reverse engineer moral systems that will get us to those conclusions. Does he increase forfeit ever? Do I wait to play Hyperdrive Scan? I think so. Cancel or reduce my forfeit bonus. Would he ever cancel his force drain? I think we'll pay that. Oh, that's too bad. Just also I could have these in cloak. Maybe I just do this instead. But anyway, back to history. Sorry, I've playing Watch Your Step is a little bit more automatic for me. This I need to think about. So this is not an area where I mean, I've thought about this a lot, but my thinking is hardly original. So if you're actually interested in what I'm going to be saying, you're better off just reading or listening to more. Because when it comes to my theory of history, I pretty much just completely agree with Marx's formulation of historical materialism. Probably the best place to find that would be on Feuerbach. So that would be where I'd recommend that you go if you're looking for someone to, because I'm not like, I don't think there's much that I can add, and I will probably just butcher some of the concepts. So that's kind of, oh, wait, you can cancel somebody's game text. Okay, do I care to cancel Panaka's game text right now? Not right now. Okay, but I could cancel Panaka's game text now and target Amidala with one. Can I cancel Padme's game text? No. I guess there's no point in doing that right now. Okay. And so yeah, let's get into it. What does historical materialism mean? Essentially, my view is that the primary or almost entirely explanation and motivation for things are the material conditions of the people, of the actors involved. That material conditions meaning things like access to food, access to water, access to shelter, heat, all kinds of resources that we need in order to survive and thrive. And and they're immune to sniper. So do I just really want to make sure I hit here? Kind of do. Yeah, let's do this. Okay, and so this idea of history is you think of the actual circumstances, so what if it, that people are living in, and they're shaped mostly by just access to resources and things that come along with that. And then you assume that most people in general, and this is obviously a generalization, but I think when you apply it to a large enough group of people, it becomes generally true as a predictive measure. Operate under the principle of rational self-interest. And that means that you can extend that especially to actors with respect to nations and peoples. Not necessarily that nations act in the best interest of the nation, but that leadership of nations generally acts in the best interest of themselves, which can often translate to the best interest of the people. And I think it's true that the more democratic a nation is, the more likely that the nation is going to correspond, like that the personal interest of the leadership is going to correlate with the interest of the people. And then you can just extend that, you can go up and down in terms of more localized to less localized, just as the things go, as like power structures. Just, I guess I technically should have played that before Vader, but I think it's unlikely Vader would have been barriered here. This guy's technically better at hitting. Could play both Asajj and Aura. I have two swings at Kenobi. They battle free, right? But then I can't move if I do that. Or I could play Aura, hope to hit, basically. I think it's worth trying to do this. Maul means a 5 attrition hit, but I think I'd rather have Maul later. Aura is better at hitting than Kenobi with the shot, but it's also more likely to be overflowed. I don't have anything for that right now. Let's do Aura. And also some mess. Okay. Jeez, I have lost my place completely. Um, so yeah. So this is in opposition to like things like great man theories or okay. Or I think the main thing to talk about is what is included and what is excluded. Maybe I just whatever. This might be bad. For instance, I don't believe in religious wars. And I guess let's back up to expand upon why. Is that things like, I think everything like culture, religion, race, um, these are important sources of solidarity that entities with power will use to shape politics, but I do not consider them to have any actual effect on behavior. Like, for instance, I don't think that, I mean, the obvious one, let's start with race. I think most people now agree, at least most people watching this would now agree that there is nothing, that race is a socially constructed entity and there's nothing biological or determinative about race in terms of the humanity of a person. Like, a person is not going to act a certain way because they are the race that they are. And I would extend that to religion, to culture, to all those things as well. But it is a way to unify a people, for instance. National identity, another one, that people can say, listen, we have this in common. These other people do not share this with us. We can band together and pursue our collective interest that we have by virtue of our religion. And it's a good way to have us versus them mechanics. This is like, I think the most obvious example to point to would be the colonization of the Americas. So you have the doctrine of discovery, right? That is because these lands are inhabited by this savage, uncivilized, non-Christian people, the Catholic Church decided that, the it was legitimate for the Catholic European nations to civilize, to proselytize to the native people, and coincidentally, that also meant they could colonize those lands and take the bounties for themselves. Now, my thought is that it didn't actually matter. If somehow, let's say that the Native Americans were Christian, everything else about their circumstances was the exact same, but they were practicing Christians when they were discovered by Christopher Columbus or whoever you want to say. My strong suspicion is that they just would have found some other reason, and in fact we've seen it bear out this way, to do the exact same thing. Like there were natives that did convert to Christianity, and that did not protect them at all, because it was never about Christianity. And so on. It's about who gets to have power, it's about who gets to control the resources, who benefits from, there's an unequal distribution of limited resources. Who is the person that gets to decide who gets what? What entities do that? For colonialists, the important thing is that it be a colony, not the people who currently occupied that land. So how does this work? So I can't search my reserve deck with I Am Your Father and still play it from Lost Pile. Because the bottom three cards are good destinies, but well, I guess so was the top. Oh well. Um, well, yeah, let's do this. And I guess yeah, I get down to the bottom three. Okay. Jeez, this is I didn't write anything down this time. I thought this was gonna be easier to talk about because it's so much more theoretical, but I'm just having difficulties talking about it in light of also playing Huntdown. Okay, so where was I? Right, okay. So material circumstances shaping basically every explanation of history, which is important because I think you also need to look at that to inform the present as well as the past. Essentially, the reason we care about history at all is as an explanation for the current day, but also a prediction of what will happen in the future based on what has happened in the past. Like you, absent any evidence to the contrary, it's reasonable to predict that humans will respond to certain situations in ways similar to how they have responded to similar situations in the past. So you can look at it for analogies, and obviously there's always going to be some differences in human material circumstances, but there are things that will be similar throughout time. And you look at that. But anyway, what is the point of all this? The point of all this is having or looking at things through a materialist analysis is the way that you ignore a lot of what I would call like bad messages. All right, let's tie this to like real life like examples that are going on right now. Let's talk about the immigration and Trump's response to. All right, so Donald Trump has this theory, and I would say this is a very anti-materialist theory. Okay. And it is that Venezuela or whoever, they're sending their criminals here, they're emptying out the jails. People come here and they're criminals. And they sent their criminals here, they come here and they're criminals. Why are they criminals? Because they're criminals. They were criminals in Venezuela, they'll be criminals in America. And that's it. It's just that's the way it is. I think that completely ignores all of the reasons why people actually are criminals, for instance. Someone is not just born to be a criminal. They're not just a criminal wherever they go. They were a criminal in Venezuela, they come to America, they're a criminal in America. People are commit crimes in large part, not exclusively, because of, you know, you're poor. You need to steal something to support yourself. You need to, there's not any other job opportunities, so you deal drugs, and so on. Or you're rich, or you're some company, and your shareholders want to maximize profits, and your incentive is to underpay your employees, or sometimes, very often, steal from your employees, not pay the requisite overtime. Like the most common form of theft, at least in America, maybe worldwide. I'm not sure. I don't have that statistics. Hyperwave scan neuters Qui-Gon. Oh, yeah. I didn't even notice that's what was going on. I would have suspected. I didn't realize that he was gonna die if Qui-Gon's text had gone. But I missed both of these cards interacting, and they ended up interacting the way I expected, but because I didn't know that either of them. I didn't know that Hyperwave Scan canceled Qui-Gon because I didn't know what Qui-Gon did. So my ignoring Qui-Gon's game text ended up being correct, but accidentally. But anyway, let's get back to so where was I even? Okay, and yeah, I think someone who was a criminal, let's say in Venezuela, I would expect is more likely to be a person that, let's just hypothesize, take as granted the ridiculous assumption, which one should never actually do with Trump, but we're doing for the sake of argument, that criminals from Venezuela are coming to America. It's probably more likely that someone that is a criminal in Venezuela will continue to be a criminal in the United States. They're for material reasons, because their life experience has taught them skills in criminality, because um, maybe they have contacts with other criminals, or for all kinds of various reasons. Okay, but it's definitely not the case that like if someone was just a criminal because of circumstance, they come here, they have different circumstance. Maybe they have better circumstances. In fact, usually that is going to be the case because people are hardly going to want to go from a place if they were very happy living in Venezuela, they probably wouldn't go through all the effort of coming to America, for instance. Just, you know, seems pretty obvious. The people that are leaving their countries to come somewhere else have a reason to do that. Very often it's because that country has a lot of problems. Very often, especially in the case of Venezuela, caused by the United States government, for instance, meddling in Venezuela, putting crippling sanctions on their country. But it's like the willingness to ignore what actually causes people to behave in a certain way and just say, oh, this is the way these people are. And you generalize that. You talk about immigrants, you talk about Venezuelans, you talk about criminals even, and not noticing that people change as their circumstances change, societies change as its circumstances change, and so on. Oh man. So now I have barely even started to cover this. I thought I was going to maybe I can play another game as let's see, is there another game up? Because I just have a good amount more that anyway, let's just play Watch Your Step. And hopefully someone will want to play. Uh oh, and let's share repeating this tab. So that brings me to the concept of the base and the superstructure, which is like pretty technical terms that I don't think exist anywhere outside of Marx, but it's hard to describe how this works without it, without that jargon. So what we would call the base is going to be stuff like that we would call the economy, essentially. All of the basic conditions of life of society, like not things that are, I mean, it does include socially constructed things. Things like the, how do I talk about this without using technical language? Like the mode of production. So for instance, the relations of production, the mode of production are all part of the base. So how we produce goods that we need to survive, how we produce goods that we use for leisure even, how they are distributed, essentially the economy. I'm trying to think of a way of distinguishing it from the economy, and honestly, it might just be synonymous. I should have actually researched this a little bit just recently because I'm drawing a blank as to how they would be distinguished. I think at one point I did have an understanding of a distinguishment, but it's not coming to mind right now. Okay, so anyway, that's the base. That's what we would call like that's the most important part. I think which everyone would agree. I mean, that is the foundation of human society is the economy. Things are built off of that, which would be the superstructure being built off of that. But so the superstructure would be defined as like the socially constructed parts of society that we build. For instance, we'll go back to religion, the culture, things like that. Ideas of human nature, politics, government. That's all superstructural. So that meaning things that we as societies create to support the functioning of the society, and which then, man, it's so easy to visualize this and it's hard to speak it into words, which then they reinforce each other is what I'm trying to get at. So, all right, let's take the example of a feudal system and religion in the context of the feudal system. You'll find a lot more intertwining in general of religion and state within the context of a feudal society than you will in modern capitalist societies. Modern capitalist societies tend to be more secular, which is a very good thing. And in its role as supporting the state in the feudal society, you would find that a lot of times religious doctrine would justify the existence of the state. So, for instance, so like talking about the divine right of kings, for instance, the most obvious example, that God has appointed me to be your king, and you are peasants, and you work the land, and that is has God has decreed it to be. Now, I'm my argument is that's not a tenet of Christianity. That's not anything that's inherently Christian. That is the state utilizing a religion to further its own ends and the ends of the people in charge, that being the king, the surrounding lords, the people, even the church itself. Because the church wants to favor the king, because then the king will favor the church. So it is just in everyone's best interest within the context of a society like a feudal society that the religious institutions support the king. All the powerful people just acting in their own rational best interests. People aren't always rational. People aren't always only acting in their best interests. People can be altruistic. People can be irrational. And you'll see deviations throughout time, throughout history, based on that. People acting selflessly. States, because of the leadership, acting selflessly. States acting illogically, because they're led by illogical people. And but that's the idea essentially, is that you're going to have the religion and the culture and ideas of national identity. They're all going to be intertwined and reinforcing what would be the base. So that would be an idea where we have a base which is essentially feudalism interacting with the superstructure of the culture, is building up the culture and religion of, let's say we're talking, I'm just going to think of European because I'm more informed of that, like it's the Catholic Church, and they support each other and they build upon each other until capitalism comes along. You just have the ability for the first time for people to gain material goods and power in a way that is divorced from the ownership of land, right? That's just a radical, radical transformation from feudalism to capitalism. Feudalism, for thousands of years now, the only source of wealth is ownership of land. There's no other property that produces more wealth than having land. And how do you get land? Royal decrees. Like nobody can. I mean, it's again, it's not exclusive, but almost entirely, if you don't have land, you can't make wealth. You don't have wealth, you can't get land. And then the Industrial Revolution happens. And if you have a factory, you don't need much land. If you are able to take a bunch of timber, you buy the timber, you turn that into ships or like whatever, textiles, you turn a bunch of wool into clothes at a rate that absolutely no one could even compare to. And now all of a sudden, if you're the person that can do that, you don't need to be a wealthy lord or landowner in order to have power to amass wealth. And all of a sudden, the material circumstances change so radically that it just doesn't even make sense anymore. The people that have the power are no longer just the people that own all of the land, and the way that they own the land and generate the wealth is not just through royal decree. You can have people who have invented a new mode of production, who make a bunch of clothes at a scale just hitherto undreamt of, and now you have a whole new class of people who are able to create wealth, but who do not have equivalent interests to the former kings and lords. Feudalism for them doesn't benefit them. You finally have people with power who are not interested in preserving the status quo of a feudal society. And then is when you get the push from a feudal society to a capitalist society, because those are the people, they're capitalists. They have capital. Capital meaning productive property, private property, property that they own that will produce, by virtue of their owning it, more wealth for themselves. Property not necessarily given to them, although it can be. There are a lot of capitalists, early capitalists, who were, lords. The smart ones, they said, "Oh wow, I can turn my wealth from the land that I own, and I can invest that in this cotton plantation, which then can fund my textile mills and so on." But it's not exclusively that. And then those lords even amass much more power relative to even other lords, even lords that outrank them. Like maybe the Duke of Cornwall or whatever had vast, vast estates, but the Baron of Winchester, I don't even know, despite having, in theory, lower rank and less productive land in terms of its scope, has recognized the possibility of the Industrial Revolution, has amassed a lot more wealth and more power, and even though they are a beneficiary of this feudal system by virtue of their great great grandfather being gifted some barony, their power would be so much greater under some other alternative systems, so they urge for that. And all of a sudden, you've got a system that no longer makes sense to people that have wealth, that have power, and the base is in flux, and you've got the superstructure there, which is becoming increasingly outdated. The church that is talking about the divine right of kings seems to make a lot more sense when people are perceiving the possibility of social mobility. And so that's the tension, is that that they reinforce each other to a certain extent, but then when the circumstances of one no longer make sense, and that being the base, you're gonna have like the death throes where it's gonna be a lagging indicator, but it's going to eventually change to like today where we've got the capitalist system, and I don't think there are many churches out there that are still talking about divine right of king. They're talking about things in a more secularized way as governments have become more secularized. And I have a couple more thoughts before I stop talking. Should I just, you know what? I'm gonna continue talking about history, and what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna do more streams. I'll probably do it even again tomorrow, but I'm gonna end now, and I'm gonna write up like, I'm gonna actually spend like 5 minutes writing an outline for myself for guidance. So I'm gonna organize the structure. But anyways, that's the concept of the base and the superstructure, how like feudalism evolved into capitalism, and how they reinforce each other, and how I would say that the conditions created that transformation, the material conditions. And I think I'm going to talk about the consequences of that and the follow through and what it teaches us about history and politics today, maybe tomorrow. But I'm going to end it here and I'm going to prepare for that. And we'll play another, there's like no games going on. No one wanted to play a game. So I'll see if I can play a game and talk more. But thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.